If you're currently in the querying trenches, or if you have been in the past, you probably know where the sentiment comes from. Why does it seem like literary agents are these evil gatekeepers? And you wonder if maybe because they are. I'm kidding. Of course they're not. I'd like to offer you a bit of a different perspective that, but at the end of this video, I think will not only help you see agents in a different light, but it will also make your querying process a teeny tiny bit better. I'm Irvi, an author and owner of authortemplate.com, your number one stop for author websites and Notion template. It might have a Canva template or two as well. You can find the link to that website in the description below. Now let's get into the video. On a daily basis, I see authors disgruntled, upset, on the verge of giving up on their author dreams because they've received so many rejections, or the wait is too long, or they just can't seem to catch a break in the querying process. That's understandable. You've poured your heart, your soul, your sweat, your tears, maybe even some blood into your craft, and to receive rejection after rejection, it's almost impossible to tolerate sometimes, and I understand that. I wanted to make this video so that if you are going through it, you can come back to it. You know, if you have a really low point, you can just kind of refresh your memory on what it could actually be. And so that way, you know, it could ease the pain of it all a little bit. What can happen is if you're in the query trenches and you're getting rejected, you can start to get to you, and then you start to question yourself, you know, whether you're even a good author, whether it's worth pursuing publishing at all, even in the self-publishing side. It might really take an emotional toll. So let's look at how this plays out. Usually you're in the query trenches, and then what happens is the first one stings, the next one stings. You think it'll be less, but it ends up being even worse. And then the third one comes and you're like, oh, I feel like you got stabbed in the gut. And then it just spirals out of control from that point on. You start to get frustrated and angry, and then your heart starts to break, and then you start wondering, is this even worth it? You know, can I even write? Should I have started this in the first place? Should I have bothered at all? And then you consider giving up and withdrawing all your queries. First of all, yes, you should have gone down that road. Yes, you should have written that novel, and yes, you should have queried that novel. And no, you should not give up on your outstanding queries. Let them do their thing. Now that we've covered that, let's go over the reality from the agent's perspective, because I think it will help buffer some of those feelings, and it might not eliminate them entirely, but I think that the shift in perspective is probably what's going to give you a little bit of a boost that you need to make it to the other side of this, whether that be, you know, becoming agented and getting published, or whether it means coming to the decision that, you know what, maybe you should pull back from querying and move on to the next stage of becoming an author, which might mean writing a new book or looking to self-publish. So let's look at that agent side of things to get an insight on what is happening behind the scenes. Getting rejected sucks. And one of the worst things about potentially getting into the querying process is if you already have people who've read your book and they say they love it, and then you query it and then you get a ton of no's from agents, and then you say, well, the readers love my book, but the agents not so much. What you have to understand is that they're reading the book from entirely different perspectives, and it's not even fair to compare the two. Readers are looking at your book at face value for the story itself. Agents are looking at it through the business lens. It's important to remember they don't get paid until you get paid. If they take you on as a client, first there's the reading. It takes time, a lot of time. Think about how long it takes you to read a book, perhaps your own. There is that. Then there is the administrative stuff that they have to do on their end and with respect to their agency. Then there is the editing portion of your book, which can include several revisions to get the book polished enough for submission. Then there's the developing a marketing plan with you, also dealing with career-related planning for the future, for your future books. And all of these things usually take place before you even get picked up by a publisher. So they are investing a significant time of their life, essentially. Agents have to be picky about who they request partials or full manuscripts from. First of all, they get 100, 200 queries a month, sometimes a week, depending on the agent. And it's only getting exponentially worse for them on that front because a lot more people are, you know, pursuing traditional publishing these days. Their inboxes are consistently full. And although you might think that your story is unique, there are probably 10 other manuscripts that are very similar to yours. And so they have to be extremely picky in what they decide to invest their time in. And there are a few things that we can look at, like stepping stones to that decision. The first first and foremost thing that an agent cares about is, can you write? And so most agents, what they will do is they will go to your sample pages and read those pages first before they even look at your query, because they want to know, can you write an opening? Can you write at all? And is it worth it for them to actually spend time reading your query to find out the other information that's relevant to your query package? And so that is the first thing that they look at. And then they look at the query package to determine some crucial information. For example, the blurb. That tells the agent more than most people realize. And it pretty much exposes your level of understanding of the craft and your own story. A good blurb will have a protagonist, antagonist, the conflict, and stakes. And if your blurb doesn't focus on those things and instead meanders on about your story as a whole, and it's like you're trying to condense your story into these 2 paragraphs or 3, they will see that as a red flag, because it tells them that you do not understand the fundamental principles of storytelling and you don't understand your story well enough. Because if you understood your story well enough, you should be able to distill it down to those two, actually to one sentence, the 1 sentence pitch. But if you cannot bring it down to a blurb and explain to somebody that, hey, this is the person who's leading the story, this is the person that is the obstacle to them, and if they don't achieve this goal that they have, we're gonna have some issues, right? So if you can't communicate that in your blurb, it's not so much it's like a yellow flag. It's not a red flag, but it's a yellow flag, because blurb writing is a skill in and of itself. And so we need to look at the blurb as, do you understand the premise of your story, and can you distill it down into its most basic blocks? Because that's going to tell them that, like, hey, I understand the craft enough and I can distill my story within this 2 paragraph structure and convey that I have a story and it's powerful enough that it can be simplified without losing its oomph in these 2 paragraphs, right? And so really, really getting into the weeds about the query, especially the blurb, is going to help you more than anything else aside from your pages. That is what the query letter as a whole is really about. It's about saying, like, hey, I know my craft, I know the industry, I know what's expected of me, and I understand storytelling, and here's proof of that. That's essentially what the query letter is. And so aside from your pages, that's why it's important to nail your query letter. Now keep in mind, agents understand how hard it can be to craft a query letter. So they don't often penalize you for not having, the perfect query letter, because your pages are the most important. However, if you were a literary agent and you get 200, let's say, thrillers a week in your inbox for consideration, and you go in and you read them, and out of 200, 100 of them are great pages, and then you go and read the query, who are you more likely to, request? Because remember, you're short on time. You don't have much time. You have your clients already. You have obligations. You have a life. Who are you more likely to give a shot to? Somebody who has taken the time to educate themselves about the business end of publishing, about this critical element, the querying, who takes the time to really learn about the agent, learn how to properly do a blurb, and, package themselves to sell themselves to an agent, because that's important. And at that point, then it just becomes a game of, what am I willing to invest in? Is it going to be the person who has taken the time to learn how to craft a query, who has gone that step above to really learn this part of the industry, or someone who hasn't, right? Because it shows to them your initiative. And so it's not an end all be all if you don't know how to craft a query properly, but I'm just saying the competition is fierce. And so you want to make sure that you are crossing your T's and dotting your I's in every respect that you can to give yourself that upper hand. Okay, so they will consider the query, unfortunately, and sometimes they'll say we don't, but they do. And then the next thing is that they will defer to their professional instincts. Your query might be great, your pages might be great, but maybe there's just something there that doesn't sit right with them, and they don't have the time to sit and mull over that. There are 200 other queries that they have to get to, maybe more. And so they defer to that inner knowing. Do I feel that spark of passion for it? Remember, the agent has to love what they're reading. They have to love your book, otherwise they can't sell it. And that is the first point at which they make the decision. Is it worth the risk of even reading a manuscript? Because remember, that takes time. So they say, you know what, this has piqued my interest. There's something here I want to read more to make that decision. And at that point, they'll request the manuscript, partial or full, and make that ultimate decision of whether they might want to consider representing you. Now, there are a whole host of reasons why you might be rejected. And some of those reasons have nothing to do with the book, okay? Have nothing to do with you as a writer. Sometimes an agent might reject simply because they already have a client who has a similar book or a similar writing style. And they don't have the time to explain these things to you in a lengthy email. So oftentimes what they will do is just give a form rejection. Another reason might be that the story is not unique enough. And what might seem novel to you, what might be a unique premise to you, might not be unique to the agent. Remember, they get hundreds of queries a week. And so the odds are they've probably heard something similar before. So it's important to remember that the most successful books usually bring one element. It doesn't have to be the whole book, but one element that is unique, that is novel, that's never been done before, or it's a twist on something that already exists. They're just done in an unexpected way. And so if you don't have something like that in your book, it might deter agents. Like I said, what might seem novel to you might not seem novel to them. And so it could be that factor at play for their rejection. Then it could be the market. Their genre might not be selling as well. And therefore editors at publishing houses are not buying that genre as much, or have outright told agents that like, hey, we're not picking this up, or we're moving on to like this other genre. And so it doesn't make sense for the agent to take on a novel that they know they can't sell. So that could be it. And then there is the subjective part, which is they just might not love it. Your writing could be on point. Your query could be perfect, but the agent just might not jive with your book. It just might not be hitting that passion point within them. And that is part of the business that unfortunately is responsible for a high degree of rejections. Agents have to be passionate about your book. When they read it, they have to go like, wow, this needs to be in the market and I need to sell it. And that's what you want from an agent. You're hiring them as a business partner. They're your representative. And if they don't love your book, they have no business trying to sell it. Because if someone is lukewarm or just, you know what, like this is okay, when they go pitch it to editors, they're not going to put their heart into it. And that will transfer to the editors, and the editors are going to go like, oh, something is off here, so maybe we shouldn't, mess with this. Because if the agent isn't passionate about your book, then why should a publisher risk paying you up front for something that they may never get a return on investment? So there is that element of subjectivity that is critical, and frankly is very important. I would personally want my agent to be hella passionate about my book, because I know when they go to sell it, they're going to put their all on the line to do so. So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that is another element of why they might reject it. Everything could be perfect. They might even love it, but they might be missing that spark of like, hey, I have to sell this. So unfortunately, that's a part of it too. And then the bad day element. Agents are human beings. We all have off days. And sometimes when we go through a day when it's like you've woken up on the wrong side of the bed, everything that comes at you is you just hate it. You just hate it. And that happens to agents, unfortunately. Most of them understand that this does happen. And so when they have these types of days, they don't even bother reading their queries because they know that they're going to filter all of these, propositions through that lens of like, I hate everything. I hate the world, right? So sometimes some agents who are, seasoned in the industry will recognize that like, hey, like today is not a day for queries. We're not going to go there. So you do have those agents, but unfortunately sometimes agents just push through it. And even though they might think that they could be objective, sometimes that taint of I hate the world today, unfortunately gets through and you might end up rejected as a result, where if they just waited a day, they might end up loving what they read. And so there is that unfortunate element, but for the most part, most agents know how to deal with this. That's why they're the professional. They know when to look at their query inbox and when to stay away from it. Then they focus on other elements of their job. So, but it does happen, and it's important to know that sometimes it does happen, and that has nothing to do with you as an author or your writing or your story. It could just be somebody having a bad day and you just got the end of the stick. It does happen. We're all human, and that's just life, and it is what it is, and you're just gonna have to swallow it. And you know what? I'm a firm believer that if it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and maybe the universe made that agent have a bad day, so when your query crossed their desk, they rejected it, because who knows, maybe that's not your agent. Maybe it's just not meant to be, and the universe aligned the stars for it to play out that way. And there's one more element to consider that I don't want to talk about, but we are the no nonsense team here, and so like what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk real talk. And that is that it could be your writing. It could be that you are not publishable yet. I know that that's not something that most authors want to hear, especially because of what they've worked on. They put their heart into it. It's your whole life. Sometimes that's what it could feel like. But it is important to recognize at a certain point that maybe it's not the genre cooling off. Maybe it's not, a bad day. Like, it could be that the writing is just not at a publishable point, at least not by professional industry standards. And so it's really important to be able to say to yourself that, hey, I need to be objective about this. Odds are you're probably not going to get a personalized rejection from an agent. And if you do, they usually do it if they can provide some tips on how to improve something that's already good. But the odds of that are you're more likely to get struck by lightning and win the lottery in the same day than not happening, to be honest with you. And the truth is that is the hardest part or hardest bridge that you have to cross, is accepting that perhaps your writing is not up to standard for traditional publishing, and the literary agent's job is to recognize that. And so it happened to me. My first novel got 140 rejections. Okay, I requeried it twice because I was like, I believe in this novel and it's, it has to be out in the world. And I was so emotionally attached to it, and like, I was sure it was going to happen. It was going to be one of those stories where, you read like, oh, they had like 100 billion rejections. And then the last one, the book took off and it's like a bestseller for, a decade. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It was just constant no. I had, out of 140, one agent gave me actual personalized feedback. And it didn't even have to do with the writing itself. It had to do with another element. And so at a certain point, it was hard to accept that, like, this isn't going to happen. But I did. I swallowed that pill and said, okay, I'm going to pull this from querying, which is what I did. And then I said, I am never going to write again, even though it was my lifelong dream to be a published author. I walked away from it all. But luckily, it only lasted 2 months because I was like, who am I kidding? I cannot not write. So I went back, and keep in mind, before I even wrote the book, I actually graduated from professional writing. And so it wasn't that I didn't know how to write, but for some reason, when I wrote this novel, I foobarred it. And I didn't see that until a year later. So after I walked away from it, and then after those 2 months where I was like, I'm never writing again, then I went and I said to myself, you know what? Clearly it's the writing, it's the craft. There's something wrong with what I'm doing here, and I need to figure out what that is before I write my next book. So I went and I studied for 6 to 8 months. I read every book on the craft. I was obsessed with learning about the industry, about, writing. That's all I did. From the time I woke up until I went to bed, was all I did was study. And then I wrote my second book. It was only after I was finished my second book that I said, you know what? Knowing what I know now and seeing that my second book was a significant improvement to the point where I started querying it, I said to myself, I need to know what I messed up in the first book. So I went back, I read it. And let me tell you, the best thing that ever happened to me in terms of my writing career was those 140 first rejections, because I recognized what was wrong with the opening pages of my book and why I got all of the rejections. And this is something that only comes with experience, with actually going through the process of being rejected, of learning and leaning into the craft, of, exposing yourself to industry knowledge and how things work. Then when you can detach emotionally, from your writing, because it's art, right? It comes from our hearts. And so we're always going to have an attachment to it, but you need to learn how to temporarily sever yourself from that so you can objectively look at your work and say, hey, like, is this good? Is this not? And so I was at that point where I was able to finally do that. And I said, the best thing that ever happened to me was being rejected, that it didn't make it beyond the literary agent stage because of what I learned as a result of it. I'm thankful to the agents that rejected me because it saved me from ruined career, before it ever even launched. For one. And then I'm also thankful because it forced me into a place where I discovered that no matter what, I'm going to end up writing. And if I'm not good enough at it yet, I'm going to put in the time, put in the effort, educate myself and figure out how to become better. And so that never would have happened had I initially been picked up by an agent. And then, if I went through the process of trying to get published, which probably would have died on sub, and it would have been even worse. Sometimes it's important to recognize that, maybe, perhaps, your writing isn't up to par, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all have to start somewhere. We all have to learn and grow. Even if you don't get an agent on your first querying journey with this book or the book that you intend to query, that doesn't mean that you're never going to get an agent. Take it as an opportunity to learn, to expand your horizons, to study the industry, to study the craft, to get better, improve, and prove everybody wrong. It can only serve you if that's how you choose to look at it, as an opportunity. It's about the mindset that you have going into this process does, because it is hard. It is extremely competitive. There are a million of you trying to get published, trying to say, look at my art and pay me for it. No feedback and all rejections is feedback. And so sometimes it's really good to step back, and this idea that, oh, everything is good no matter what, it's just, I think that creates false expectations and false hopes in people. And, you know, I don't think it serves you or your future career to give yourself false hope, to lie to yourself that, you know, you say, oh, I'm the best author. All my readers liked it so far. And it's like your mom and like your cousin who read it and they loved it. Of course they're going to love it. They don't have the objective professional lens to read, you know, your story through. And you can only benefit at a certain point by putting on that objectivity cap and saying like, hey, maybe it is the right, and then withdrawing from the querying journey and then going back to the board and saying like, okay, what's next? What do I need to do to get better? And that's what I would recommend. So there are many reasons why you might get rejected. The majority of them will not have anything to do with you. All of them will have nothing to do with you as a person or your value as a person. That's 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. I can't stress that enough. 100% of your rejections have nothing to do with you as a person. And then 90% of the time, it has nothing to do with your book, your story, or your writing. A lot of the times it's just circumstantial. It might just be that the agent knows they can't sell it, or, you know, other factors that have nothing to do with the actual writing. And then there is the part where it could be the writing, and we need to be honest about that part with ourselves. Like, it could be that. It just could be. Okay? It's only going to serve you to acknowledge that. But then on the other hand, you might actually get a request for a partial or a full, which could result in an offer of representation. Now, there's something really important about getting an offer that you have to keep in mind. That even if you do get an offer, that might not be your agent. Because when you do get an offer, you always tell other agents that you're querying that like, hey, I got an offer. And then they might, you know, put you ahead in their querying inbox, read your stuff, perhaps make an offer as well. That being said, that is the point at which you will interview the agent and decide if they are a right fit for you. Because remember, at the end of the day, the entire industry rests on authors. Everyone in the industry gets paid because of the author. The agent is not up here and you're not down here, okay? You're business partners, like so. And it's important to remember that, especially when you're getting an offer, or it could just be the only offer you have on hand. But it's still important to vet the agent through an interview process to make sure that you are a right fit, because they might like your book, they might be really excited about it, but then your vision might not align with theirs. And it's important to make sure that it does, because if you decide to jump on board with having them as your agent because it's, you know, it's hard to get one, you might regret it for your career in the future. And so it's really important to have that interview with them and really make sure you're a good fit, because it can impact your career in ways you can't even imagine. No matter at what point you are in your querying journey, okay, or, you know, even if you're accepted with the agent and then you go on submission to a publisher, something that you need to keep in mind the whole time, okay, it's gonna be rough. The whole time it's gonna be rough. But you will also have really great days. It's gonna be some of the best days of your life too. Don't get me wrong. It's not all terrible. No matter what stage you're at, whether you're in the querying process, you know, vetting the agent, if you get an agent and you go into submission and you're dealing with that weight and those rejections, what you have to keep in mind the whole time is the entire industry exists because of authors. No author, no money. Not for the agent, not for the publisher, not for the editor, the designers, you know, of the covers and whatnot, not for the marketing team, not for the financial team at the publisher, not for the janitor who works for the publisher. All of the people in the publishing industry make their money because of authors, because no story, no industry. So it's important to remember that you are not at the bottom of that totem pole. Okay, you are the reason the totem pole exists in the first place. Okay, yes, publishers make, you know, the big money and they make the decisions, but at the end of the day, you, the author, is the reason why it all exists, why it all works, and why all of these other people are profiting is because of you as the writer. And if your story takes off, so do their bank accounts. And so it's really important that when you're entering the industry, that you don't think of yourself as lesser. You are always on par with all of the people, you know, the agent, the publisher, the editors, and you are always on par. You are business partners, right? Because you're in it together to make money, and they're not above you and talking down to you. No, right? You always demand respect if you're not given. But again, most people in this industry are really great. I'm just trying to remind you of the fact that none of it exists if it wasn't for writers. And so don't you dare give up, because if you give up and then the next author gives up and then another author gives up, the industry will collapse and we'll have no books to read. And so it's really important that you keep going, that, you know, just because one book might not make it through the querying trenches, that doesn't mean the next one won't. Or even if the next one fails, you know, third time's the charm. And if the third time isn't the charm, we'll keep going. Because if this is truly your dream, your passion, you're gonna do what you need to do to get to the other end where you're smiling, where you're happy, where your dreams have come true. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep these things in mind, that the majority of the rejections that you're initially going to get that have nothing to do with you as an author. A lot of it is just subjective elements that are at play. And it could also just be the universe saying, you know what, not meant for you. It's not your time yet, right? So it could be that. I don't know. I'm just, you know, taking a stab in the dark here. Never, ever give up on your dreams. It might not happen today. It might not happen tomorrow. But guess what? In a week from now, could be your day. If you are in the process of querying, or if you are planning to query, and you're looking for something to get organized, I have the perfect template for you. It is called Author HQ. It has an agent tracker and a query tracker. It's really cool. That's not even the best part, the actual book management system, which is the main reason for this Notion template. And you can track over 100 character details in it, including relationships. You can track locations, chapters, the scenes. You have continuity, all these really cool features. Check it out. And the pinned comment, I will put the actual template, but in the description, I will put the link to the video so you can check out the full demo. It's amazing. I will see you in the next video.